So one of the things about pen and ink that I want all of my students to recognize is that it requires practice. You have to practice and practice so that your hand understands the feel of pen and ink and how much pressure to put on the point, when to let go, what direction to drag your pen in, what you can get away with and what you can't. And you can only do that with practice. So one of the things that I like to use in order to practice pen and ink and remind myself, especially if I haven't used it for a while, I like to do practice drawings or doodles with the pen and ink. But I don't want them to just be anything. I want to, if I just doodle any old thing that comes to my head, I find that sometimes I cheat. So if I'm trying to do something specific, it's going to make my hand have a little bit more control. So I'd like to show you a couple of examples. I think this is a perfect opportunity to use op art. So it's using shapes repetitively in a pattern to create some really visually interesting artworks. And then afterward, these artworks can be colorized, such as this one. Okay, it's the same op art except that it was done with watercolors afterwards. So it's a great opportunity to use a pen and ink. Here's another one. This one also done in pen and ink. And then here's another version of that same one done much darker. Okay, and filling the entire page. So depending on how it's done, they in themselves become beautiful, beautiful artworks. So what I'd like to show you now is how to get the one that I call the worm, because that's what it reminds me of. So I'm going to show you how to do versions of the worm and then versions of the triangles. Okay, so the first one, the worm, is very simple. Dip your pen. I've drawn for myself a border of where I want it to end. I don't want to do a massively huge one for this. And so very simply, if we're going to do the simplest version of it, you're going to go to about the middle of your page and you're going to do a very softly sweeping line that kind of curves up and down. I've let my pen sit, sorry about that. And now it doesn't want to. So just a little swirl like that. Not something major, okay? Just a couple of bumps. Then you're going to put a dot about 1 centimeter from each end. And then you're going to count out 6 more dots randomly. I don't want them spaced equally. So this one I'm going to put here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe 6 here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in total. Okay, that's it. So now I dip my pen again to make sure I've got enough ink to pull down the rest of the ink, and all I'm going to do is connect every other one. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go from this dot, and please don't make the dots super visible, okay? It's just for you to be able to see them. And then I'm going to, with a curve, connect one dot to the next, just like that. I'm going to do it underneath like this. I'm going to do my next one to here, and so on along the way. Okay? So some are going to be larger than others, some will go over hills, just like that. And it's great practice for both going up and going down with your pen and ink. Alright, so you've kind of formed this little chain of jewels. When you get to the end, pretend that your dot is off the page, like that, okay? And then go off towards it, but don't actually draw it. Like I did there. Sorry. There we go. Alright, there. You've started your first line. And now the rest is just fun. So we're going to now draw every other one. Okay, so I'm going to get you started, and then I will we'll look back at the finished product. So what we're doing with this is I'm going to go from the dot that I originally put. I'm going to go back to the starting point and go around back to the other dot. Very simple. Do it again. Do it again. And you're going to notice as you do this, your hand is going to want to move in a certain direction. Okay, so find out what's comfortable. Do you need to move your paper? Do you need to move your hand? So that you're getting smooth, not wobbly lines from your pen and ink. Now after you do a couple of them, you can't really go back to that starting point. You kind of make a new starting point but still connected. They all have to be touching. So make sure that they're all touching and going around. You don't want them too skinny. Now your little worm is going to travel. Some of them are going to be thin, some of them are going to be a little bit thicker, depending on how fast you do this and how much control you have, but every one of them should touch again, just like that, okay? And you let it go as far as you want it to, as leaning one way or the other. It will actually make your drawing all the more interesting. So I do about 3 coming from the same starting point, and then I make myself a new starting point, and I do another 3. And if I catch myself pressing too hard, I kind of reevaluate how I'm drawing and keep going. When I get to the top, I keep going as if I go all the way around, okay? Just like that, except that I stop and do that. Now I'm going to do the bottom. Now, depending on if you're comfortable in the upward motion, you may choose to flip your paper around. Or if you're comfortable in the under motion, you may like this better. And this is the whole point of the exercise, is that you're going to be flipping back and forth. Okay, so when we reach this point where you have 2 funnels or worms or whatever you want to call them, and we're going to do the middle one, you can go ahead and do all of the lines, every other one first, and then come back to this, but I'd like to show you how you're supposed to do them now. So now I go back to my starting point as usual, but this time I'm only going to go in one direction. I'm going to decide which direction, whether this side or this side, and I'm going to hug, I'm going to call this a wall, and I'm going to hug one wall or the other. So I'm always touching one of the walls. And you'll see the importance of that in a minute. So I'm going to start on this side. I have this tendency to, when I do this type of drawing, to always work this way, so I'm not going to fight it. That seems to be my natural way of doing things. And I'm always going to touch this wall. I'm not worried about touching the other wall, but this one I am. And so at some point, it starts to go maybe a little bit smaller as I pull over a little bit. And that's perfectly okay. And in fact, will make it much more interesting. So let's see what happens when I pull over the entire way and I'm making it smaller. Okay, so then we've created another empty area. So we've created this little almost triangle piece. So when you get one of those, what you do is you go to the point, you make yourself like a little teardrop shape like that, a little hook, and now you're going to hug this side of the wall. So you're going to go on this side and go around, even if it's really tiny. So it makes it more interesting. And it will slowly get bigger. But you're always going to be touching this side. So even if it travels, it's perfectly okay. There you go. All right, so now we've created another V. Same thing. We do a little loop at the bottom and we hug this side again. So you alternate, okay? These are really tiny because it's a skinny area, but that's okay. As I get into a wider area, it grows somewhat. And this is what for this type of op art, what makes it look so interesting. Just make sure your line always touches, that there's no gaps. Voila. Okay, so you can start to see the worms and the different size worms forming. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same at the bottom, and then you end up having this funnel pattern. Okay, so now I'd like to show you what it looks like when it's done. I showed it to you, so let's look at it again. Okay, I'll take my finished one here. So you can see how this created a funnel, and then when I did the bottom section, it looked like it was all connected as one solid funnel. Okay, so then what do you do when you get to an edge like this? It's really important when you get to an edge that you use a scrap piece of paper underneath your drawing. Take my scrap piece of paper here. So I'm going to take my drawing and put it on top of a scrap piece of paper like this. And when I draw, I have to, in my mind, envision that there's another one of these funnels here to the side. Remember we said that we were going to try to draw it pretending that there was another dot back here. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my scrap paper right up to the line, okay? And I'm literally going to draw right onto it. So I'm going to hug this wall on this side, okay? So I'm going to go to my starting point and very carefully go over right onto my paper, all right, till I know, okay, about there. If this is my imaginary dot that I have, it kind of looks like that. There's an imaginary dot there. And so now I'm going to, because the paper will hit my nib every time, I'm going to work the opposite direction. I'm going to hit this wall over here. The first one was just to know where I was going to put it. So now I go back to the starting point, and as I go around, it automatically draws in the right spot. See? It doesn't matter that I'm flipping onto the other page. And that will prevent us, we have a tendency to angle towards the middle, so this will continue the pattern as it naturally would have been at any other spot on the page, okay? And there we have it. Then you remove your page, and it looks very naturally like it belongs there. Okay, so continue until all of your sections are complete and you have an op art drawing in pen and ink, which you can then colorize, or you can continue with pen and ink shading, which I will just show you in a moment. So here's an example of shading with pen and ink. This similar type of op art. The first op art we did had just one simple line that we started from, but you can do multiple lines, you can do them vertically, like you really have to just use your imagination on how that part is done. And then what I did was on half of it, I filled it in with my pen and ink straight black, okay? And you can do that with a brush, or you can do it with your pen for practice. And then on the other areas, I used stippling to create the shadows. So tiny, well-placed dots. The closer together they are, the darker it appears. The farther apart they are, the lighter it appears. When you have both the dark and the light, it gives the impression of curving. So I've got dark on the sides of these curves and light down the middle. Okay? You can see the light here traveling. So it makes for an interesting op art. So you can get that effect, or you can have the colorized effect, and you can do this grayscale too if you were going to do an ink wash. So all I did with this is I took my colored inks, I did a wash, a light wash over top of the whole thing. Then I went back in, I did a second layer glazed, but just on the sides, curving it in. Okay, this way I curved up, this way I curved down, and what that does is it creates a lighter area in the middle, okay, and gives the impression that it's turning. All right, so adding even more depth to the op art that we created. Op art, by the way, I didn't explain, is optical art, so it makes your eyes kind of look, it tricks your eyes, and is very interesting to look at. So there's a couple of different interesting things that you can do with your final op art. I hope you enjoy that.